What if the endless dreaming without doing, the trust the universe while avoiding responsibility phenomenon, what if all of that has been slowly, systematically dismantled over the past 5 months? What if the exhaustion you've felt isn't depression, it's the weight of finally becoming accountable for your own spiritual evolution? What if Saturn's been asking you one question this entire retrograde? Are you willing to do the work your dreams require, or are you just in love with the fantasy? Welcome back, friends. I'm Elizabeth Knowles, evolutionary astrologer, and this is the Celestial Lab. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any new updates about what's happening in the heavens. Saturn stations direct on November 27th and 28th, 2025 at 25 degrees and 9 arc minutes of Pisces, ending a retrograde that began on July 13th at 1 degree of Aries. This isn't just any other ordinary planetary station. This is Saturn completing its final review before permanently leaving Pisces on February 13th of 2026. Saturn entered Pisces on March 29th of 2023 and has spent the last 2.5 years teaching you how to build structure in the formless, how to commit to what has no edges, and how to be disciplined about mystery itself. Saturn retrograded back from Aries into Pisces on September 1st of this year for some unfinished business. For the past nearly 3 months, Saturn has been asking, what did you skip? Where did you avoid the hard work? What spiritual maturity are you still refusing to claim? And here's what makes this station extraordinarily powerful. Jupiter is at 25 degrees Cancer, forming an exact trine to Saturn at its direct station. The greater benefic supporting the greater malefic. Emotional abundance meeting spiritual responsibility. Faith meeting discipline. Vision meeting structure. Neptune is also in the final degrees of Pisces, retrograde until December 10th, traveling alongside Saturn in the last chapter of a 165-year cycle. Saturn and Neptune both enter Aries in early 2026 and meet at 0 degrees Aries on February 20th of 2026. This is close. This is integration. This is the moment when everything you've learned about spiritual maturity, emotional sovereignty, and the difference between faith and fantasy comes together. The dream work is ending, friends. The real work begins now. Starting with Saturn's exile and the Golden Age. The Golden Age built on discipline. The Romans had a very different relationship with Saturn than the Greeks had with Kronos. While the Greeks saw Kronos as a tyrant who devoured his own children and was rightfully overthrown, the Romans venerated Saturn as the founder of civilization itself. Here's the myth that matters for Saturn in Pisces. After being defeated and overthrown by his son, Jupiter, or Zeus, Saturn was exiled from the heavens. He was dethroned, defeated, stripped of cosmic power. He arrived in Italy, specifically in Latium, the region that would become Rome, broken, fugitive, and humbled. But here's what's profound. Saturn's golden age didn't happen before his fall. It happened after. When Saturn arrived in Latium, he was welcomed by Janus, the two-faced god who could see both past and future, both beginnings and endings. Janus recognized that this fallen god still had wisdom to offer, so Janus gave Saturn a share of his kingdom, and together they co-ruled. The Latium at that time was inhabited by savage humans who lived among wild nymphs and fauns. There was no order, no agriculture, no laws, no civilization. The people lived in chaos. Saturn taught them how to farm. He showed them how to sow seeds, cultivate crops, harvest grain, process grapes. He gave them their first laws. He taught them morality, peaceful conflict through resolution, civic responsibility. He transformed a barbaric population into a civilized society. According to the Roman poet Virgil, Saturn gathered together the unruly race scattered over mountain heights and gave them laws. Under Saturn's reign, Latium experienced the Golden Age, a time of perfect peace, abundance, and equality. All humans were equal. There was no war, no hunger, no social hierarchy. The land was fertile, life was good. The Romans built their first temple to Saturn at the foot of the Capitoline Hill, one of the oldest and most sacred sites in Rome. This temple housed the state treasury, symbolizing that Saturn's wisdom about structure, discipline, and resource management was the foundation of Rome itself. Here's what this myth teaches about Saturn in Pisces. This is exactly what Saturn in Pisces has been teaching you for 2.5 years. The golden age comes after defeat, not before. Your spiritual maturity doesn't arrive when you're on top of the world, friends. When everything's working, when you feel powerful and in control. It arrives after you've been humbled, after you've failed, when you've been stripped of illusions and forced to start over. Saturn arrived in Latium, dethroned and fugitive, the same way you felt during this transit, perhaps, defeated by reality, exhausted by trying to control what can't be controlled, broken open by loss, limitation, and endings. But Saturn didn't arrive empty-handed. He brought wisdom earned through suffering. He brought the knowledge of how to build something sustainable. He brought discipline, structure, the capacity to teach others what he'd learned through his own hard journey. The golden age isn't a return to innocence. It's civilization built consciously. The Greeks had their golden age under Kronos, when humans lived without effort, when the earth spontaneously provided, when there was no need for work or discipline or laws. That was the age of unconsciousness, paradise without awareness. But Saturn's Roman golden age was different. It required work. It required learning how to farm, planting seeds, tending crops, harvesting at the right time. It required laws, structure, boundaries, accountability. It required discipline, showing up consistently, building over time, maintaining what was created. Saturn in Pisces says, the dream only becomes real through structure, not despite it. You don't transcend material reality to reach spiritual enlightenment. You bring structure to the spiritual. You build containers for the mystical. You create discipline around your dreams so that they can actually manifest. Spiritual maturity is earned, not bestowed. Saturn didn't rule Latium because of his divine right. He ruled because he'd earned wisdom through defeat. He ruled because he had something valuable to teach. He ruled because he was willing to do the work of building civilization from the ground up. Your authority, spiritual, professional, or personal, it doesn't come from titles, credentials, or claiming enlightenment. It comes from having walked the path, from having failed and learned and trying over and over again, from being willing to build slowly, patiently, with discipline. True freedom requires structure. The people of Latium weren't free when they lived in chaos. They became free when Saturn gave them laws, taught them agriculture, showed them how to organize society. Structure didn't limit their freedom. It made their freedom possible. Your boundaries don't restrict your spiritual life. They protect it. Your discipline doesn't kill spontaneity. It creates the space for genuine inspiration. And your commitment doesn't trap you. It liberates you from the exhausting work of keeping all your options open all the time. Saturn in Pisces has been teaching you how to be like Saturn arriving in Latium. Defeated, yes, but wise. Humble, yes, but capable. Broken open, yes, but ready to build something that lasts. Here's another myth to illuminate this transit. Friends, there's another layer to understanding Saturn in Pisces. Poseidon, god of the sea, ruler of the depths, lord of earthquakes and storms. Pisces is the ocean, boundless, infinite, dissolving all edges. It's the realm where everything flows together, where boundaries collapse, where the drop becomes the ocean and the ocean becomes the drop. This is beautiful. This is mystical. This is also dangerous. Poseidon wasn't just the god of the sea. He was also the god of horses, creatures that must be tamed, bridled, and directed. In Greek mythology, Poseidon created the first horse by striking the earth with his trident. The horse represented directed energy, the wildness of the sea given form, given structure, given purpose. Saturn in Pisces is Poseidon's trident striking the depths, bringing structure to the formless, discipline to the flowing, accountability to the infinite. Without structure, the ocean drowns you. Without boundaries, compassion becomes codependency. Without discipline, spiritual practice becomes spiritual bypassing. Without responsibility, surrender becomes abdication. Here's the paradox Saturn in Pisces demands that you hold. You must be boundless and boundaried. You must dissolve into oneness and return to your individuated self. You must surrender control and take full responsibility. You must trust the mystery and do the practical work. This isn't contradiction, friends. This is maturity. This is what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. This is what spiritual teachers call form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Saturn in Pisces says, the mystical and the material are not separate. Your spiritual evolution requires embodied action. Let's take a look at the word Saturn. Saturn derives its name from the Roman god Saturnus, associated with agriculture, time, and harvest, the deity who presided over the golden age of abundance before being overthrown by Jupiter. The Greeks knew this god as Kronos, the titan of time who both devoured his children and ultimately faced the consequences of attempting to control fate itself. In astrology, Saturn embodies limitation, structure, responsibility, and the maturation process. It represents the boundaries we encounter, the discipline we must cultivate, and the wisdom earned through facing reality's constraints. Saturn asks us to build something enduring, to honor our commitments, and to develop mastery through sustained effort. Where Saturn resides in our chart shows where we face our greatest tests and ultimately where we have the potential to develop our most profound authority and resilience. Let's look at how Saturn in Pisces shows up in society and get some historical context for this transit. As Saturn stations direct in Pisces, we're likely to see collective themes around these topics. Spiritual authority and institutions. Questions about religious and spiritual leadership becoming more concrete. We may see accountability demanded from spiritual teachers, religious organizations, or wellness industry figures who have overstepped boundaries or made false promises. The structure of faith-based institutions could undergo necessary reorganization. Mental health and collective grief. Society moving from avoidance to acknowledgement around mental health crises, addiction, and collective trauma. Expect more serious conversations about establishing better support systems, funding for mental health resources, and confronting the ways that we've failed vulnerable populations. Also, boundaries around compassion. The difference between genuine service and martyrdom becoming clearer in social discourse. We may see important conversations about sustainable caregiving, the limits of individual responsibility for systemic problems, and establishing healthier boundaries in helping professions. Next, creative industries and illusion. The entertainment industry, film, music, and the arts facing structural reckoning. Issues around AI-generated content, authenticity in creative work, and fair compensation for artists could come into sharper focus as Saturn direct asks us to face practical realities we've been avoiding. Next up, water, oceans, and dissolution. Concrete action or painful accountability around ocean pollution, water rights, flooding, or maritime issues. Saturn direct can bring the bill due for what we've ignored while it was retrograde. Environmental consequences we can no longer romanticize away. Now let's look at some historical context. Saturn's last passage through Pisces was from 1993 to 1996. These patterns aren't theoretical. We saw them unfold during Saturn's previous journey through Pisces. Kurt Cobain's death in April of 1994 crystallized the tension between artistic authenticity and commercial exploitation, sparking ongoing conversations about mental health in creative industries and whether sensitive artists can survive brutal fame. The Oslo Accords, 1993 and 1995, represented ambitious Israeli-Palestinian peace attempts, Saturn bringing structure to Piscean ideals of unity, yet demonstrating the shadow. Boundaries too permeable to hold, promises without implementation mechanisms. Prime Minister Rabin's 1995 assassination showed both reconciliation attempts and their tragic unraveling. Nelson Mandela's election in April 1994 as South Africa's first black president embodied Saturn in Pisces at its highest. Structure dissolving in service of universal dignity. His Truth and Reconciliation Commission created frameworks for processing collective grief and healing systemic wounds through forgiveness and accountability. Email and the internet became widely accessible, fulfilling Pisces' version of universal interconnection while creating our current struggles with digital addiction, information overload, and privacy erosion. Saturn giving form to boundless connection without wisdom to establish healthy limits. Saturn in Pisces creates conditions for both spiritual maturity and spiritual reckoning, for structures that heal and structures that dissolve, for dreams becoming real through discipline or collapsing under the weight of fantasy. Let's look at some words that teach. We're going to examine 5 words that illuminate Saturn stationing direct in Pisces. Number 1, discipline. From the Latin disciplina, meaning instruction, knowledge, from discipulus, pupil, student, from discere, to learn. Discipline isn't punishment. It's structure that allows learning to occur. It's showing up consistently enough that transformation can happen. Saturn in Pisces asks, what spiritual disciplines have you committed to? Not what you believe, not what you aspire to, not what you post about, but what do you actually practice? Number 2, responsibility, from the Latin respondere, to respond, from back, spondere, to pledge. Responsibility is the ability to respond. It's pledging yourself back to what you've committed to. Saturn direct asks, are you responsible? Can you respond to what life is asking of you? Or are you waiting for life to respond to your demands? Number 3, integrity, from the Latin integritas, meaning wholeness, soundness, completeness. From integer, intact, whole, complete. Integrity isn't moral superiority, it's wholeness. It's alignment between what you say and what you do, between your values and your actions, between your inner truth and your outer expression. Saturn in Pisces reveals where you've fractured yourself, where you believe one thing and do another, where you claim spiritual values but act from ego, where you talk about transformation but resist the actual work. Direct motion is the opportunity to reintegrate, to become whole again. Number 4, structure, from the Latin structura, a fitting together, arrangement, from struere, to pile, to build, to arrange. Structure isn't rigidity, friends, it's arrangement. It's how things fit together to create something functional, beautiful, and enduring. Saturn in Pisces teaches that dreams need structure to become real. Vision without structure is fantasy. Faith without structure is delusion. Compassion without structure is codependency. What structures are you finally ready to build? And number 5, we have commitment, from the Latin committere, to unite, to connect, combine, from com, together, and mittere, to send, let go. Commitment is paradoxical. It's bringing things together and letting go. You commit to a relationship. You bring yourself together and you let go of all other options. You commit to a path. You bring your energy together and you let go of the path not taken. Saturn direct asks, what are you finally ready to commit to? Knowing that commitment means letting everything else go. Now let's talk about the evolutionary purpose. Saturn direct in Pisces represents a collective evolutionary mandate, learning to build structure around the sacred, to bring discipline to devotion, and create boundaries within boundlessness. Here's the soul level lesson. For 2.5 years, Saturn has been demanding spiritual maturity, not transcendence, but accountability, not escape from material reality, but full engagement with it, not fantasy, but the hard work of making dreams real. Saturn also asks, can you hold mystical awareness while paying your bills? Can you feel universal oneness while maintaining healthy boundaries? Can you surrender to the mystery while taking full responsibility for your choices? This is Saturn's essential teaching. Limitation creates freedom. Structure enables flow, and commitment liberates. Here's the evolutionary crisis. Saturn direct creates a pressure point. You can no longer claim spiritual maturity that you haven't earned. You can't talk about transformation without demonstrating it in your daily life. You can't use spiritual language to avoid emotional work. You can't demand others grow while refusing to face your own shadow. You can't confuse understanding with integration or knowing with doing. Saturn doesn't accept intentions, only evidence. Not what you believe, but what you actually build. Not what you think you are, but who you truly become through consistent action over time. And here's the evolutionary opportunity, friends. Saturn stationing direct offers precise integration. The retrograde showed you where you were spiritually immature, emotionally avoidant, using faith as an escape. Now comes the work of rebuilding with integrity. This is your chance to build structure strong enough to hold your actual gifts, not your fantasized potential. To create boundaries clear enough to sustain intimacy without dissolution. To develop discipline rigorous enough to support transformation, not just talk about it. And to earn authority through walking the path, not performing spirituality. It also allows you to complete what you started instead of endlessly beginning again. Here's why this matters evolutionarily. We're at the end of a 2,000-year astrological age. The Piscean age gave us organized religion, savior mythology, martyrdom as holiness, transcendence as the goal. It also gave us spiritual bypassing, victim consciousness, waiting for rescue, avoiding embodiment. Saturn and Neptune both leaving Pisces in early 2026 marks a collective graduation. But you can't graduate if you haven't done the work. You can't enter the Aries age of individuation, courage, and pioneering if you're still caught in Piscean fantasy, in Piscean victimhood, or Piscean spiritual immaturity. Saturn's final question before leaving Pisces is, did you do the work or did you just talk about it? The souls who can answer yes, honestly, who've built real structures, set real boundaries, and made real commitments, completed real cycles, who have truly integrated Saturn and Pisces, these will be the ones who lead us into what comes next. Not as gurus, but as humans who matured through limitation, who built beauty within constraints, who created lasting value through sustained effort. Saturn in Pisces teaches that spiritual evolution isn't about transcending your humanity. It's about becoming fully human with consciousness, compassion, and responsibility. The evolutionary purpose of Saturn direct in Pisces is simple, friends. Become the bridge between spirit and matter that you came here to be. The dream becomes real when you do the actual work. Saturn is direct. Now build. Let's talk about the Jungian dimension, the wounded Fisher King, and spiritual responsibility. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the Fisher King myth, a central figure in the Grail legends who embodies the wound that won't heal and the wasteland that results from spiritual abdication. The Fisher King was wounded in the thighs or genitals, a wound to his life force, his creativity, his generative power. Unable to die but unable to heal, he sat fishing by a river while his kingdom turned into a wasteland. The land itself became barren because the king wouldn't face his wound. The Fisher King couldn't be healed by medicine or magic. He could only be healed when someone, the Grail Seeker, asked the right question. What ails thee? Or, whom does the Grail serve? The question itself was the healing. Someone caring enough to see the wound, to ask about the suffering, to witness the king's pain without looking away. That was what restored the king and healed the wasteland. Here's what this myth teaches about Saturn in Pisces. Jung understood the Fisher King as a symbol of spiritual wounding and collective stagnation. When we refuse to face our wounds, when we bypass them with spiritual platitudes and numb them with substances or distraction or project them onto others, we create wastelands ourselves, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of everyone around us. Saturn in Pisces has been the Grail Seeker asking, what ails thee? What wound are you carrying that you won't face? What spiritual bypassing are you using to avoid your own suffering? What fantasy are you living in while your actual life becomes a wasteland? The Fisher King represents Pisces without Saturn. Infinite suffering without accountability. Eternal wounding without transformation, waiting for someone to rescue you instead of doing the work of healing on your own. Saturn direct represents the moment you stop waiting. You ask yourself the question. You witness your own wound. You take responsibility for your own healing, not because you caused the wound, but because you're the only one who can transform it. Here's the shadow work that Saturn direct demands. Saturn in Pisces exposes spiritual shadows, victim consciousness disguised as surrender. I'm just flowing with what is, when you're actually avoiding making decisions, taking action, or claiming agency. Compassion fatigue as self-abandonment, giving endlessly to others while telling yourself you're being selfless, when actually you're terrified of your own needs, your own desires, and your own worthiness to receive. Spiritual materialism as a shadow, collecting practices, teachers, modalities, retreats, and certifications, using spirituality as an achievement rather than transformation. The savior complex as shadow, believing you're here to rescue others while avoiding your own need to be whole, separate, and boundaried. Mystical bypassing, using we're all one to avoid accountability for your actual behavior and actual relationships with actual people. Saturn direct says the shadow work is the spiritual work. You don't transcend the shadow, you integrate it. You don't rise above your own humanity, you become fully human. You don't bypass your wounds, you metabolize them into medicine. Here's what Saturn's been teaching since July during the retrograde. Saturn went retrograde on July 13th at 1 degree of Aries, the first spark of new initiative, new identity, new assertion, the first degree of the zodiac. Then Saturn backed into Pisces on September 1st, saying, not yet, there's unfinished business here. You're not ready for the new cycle until you complete the old one. For the past 5 months, Saturn retrograde has been an internal audit. Where did you skip steps? What spiritual maturity did you claim without actually earning it? What boundaries did you say you'd set but never enforced? What structures did you start building but abandoned when they got difficult? Where are you still spiritually immature? Where do you want the benefits of spiritual practice without the actual discipline? Where do you want emotional sovereignty without doing the inner work? Where do you want conscious relationships without facing your own patterns? What are you avoiding through spiritual bypass? What reality are you refusing to face by claiming it's all divine? Everything happens for a reason. I'm releasing it to the universe. Where is your compassion actually codependency? Who are you overgiving to because you're afraid of your own unworthiness? What relationships are you sustaining that should have ended because you're confusing loyalty with self-abandonment. What dreams require you to finally grow up? What vision can't manifest until you stop waiting for permission, rescue, or perfect conditions and simply start doing the work yourself? Saturn retrograde stripped away the illusions. It showed you where you were lying to yourself. It revealed the gap between who you claim to be and who you actually are when tested. Now Saturn goes direct. The review is over. The work begins. But here's what makes this station extraordinarily powerful. You're not facing this work in isolation. The cosmos is supporting you through Jupiter's exact trine, and this entire process is happening within the context of a much larger completion. Neptune's 14-year journey through Pisces also coming to an end. So let's start with Jupiter trine Saturn, where faith meets discipline. Jupiter at 25 degrees Cancer forms an exact trine to Saturn at 25 degrees Pisces at this direct station. This is the same supportive energy that Venus activated 2 weeks ago. But now it's not about love and values. It's about vision and structure. Jupiter in Cancer says, I believe in you. I have faith in your capacity. I see your potential. I'm offering emotional support, nurturing, abundance, the larger perspective. Saturn in Pisces says, good, now prove it. Show me you're willing to do the work. Build the container, create the structure, make the commitment, be accountable. This trine is grace meeting grit. It's the universe saying, I'll support you, but I won't do it for you. Jupiter offers emotional generosity to face difficult truths, faith that your efforts matter, optimism grounded in realistic assessment, resources, internal and external, to do the work, the larger perspective that sees your struggle as purposeful. And Saturn simultaneously demands consistent action over time, accountability for your choices, structure that can hold your vision, boundaries that protect your energy, maturity that accepts reality without resentment. Together, they create responsible optimism, not toxic positivity, not pessimistic resignation, but clear-eyed faith that says, this is hard and I can do it. This takes time and I'm committed. This requires work and I am willing. And we have Neptune in Pisces, the final chapter. Neptune has been in Pisces since 2011. 14 years of spiritual awakening, collective disillusionment, the dissolution of old forms, the blurring of boundaries between truth and fantasy. Neptune is currently retrograde at 29 degrees Pisces, stationing direct on December 10th, then entering Aries on January 26, 2026. Saturn and Neptune will meet at 0 degrees Aries on February 20th of next year, a conjunction that happens approximately every 36 years. Saturn and Neptune traveling together through the final degrees of Pisces is the completion of a collective spiritual cycle. We're at the end of the age of Pisces consciousness, the age of belief, faith, transcendence, martyrdom, salvation, the dream of unity. We're entering the age of Aries consciousness, individuation, assertion, pioneering, courage, the work of becoming. Saturn direct at 25 degrees Pisces says, complete the work, finish what you started. Don't take unfinished business into the next cycle. What spiritual illusions are you finally ready to release? What fantasies about yourself, your relationships, your purpose need to dissolve? What idealism needs to be tempered with realism so you can actually create what you envision? Okay, friends, here's some sign-by-sign guidance for this transit. Listen for your sun and your rising sign. Starting with Aries, Saturn has been in your 12th house, the realm of the unconscious, hidden enemies, self-undoing, spiritual retreat. For 2.5 years, you've been dismantling unconscious patterns, facing hidden fears, learning to be alone without being lonely. The retrograde asked, what self-sabotage are you still engaging in? What unconscious beliefs are undermining your conscious goals? For the direct motion, It's time to emerge. On February 13th, Saturn enters your first house, your identity, your body, your self-assertion. But you can only step into that mature, boundaried selfhood if you've completed the shadow work. Evolutionary work for you, Aries. Release the victim story. Stop blaming external circumstances for internal patterns. Claim agency for your own unconscious. For Taurus, Saturn is in your 11th house of friendships, community, and collective vision, hopes, and dreams. You've been auditing your social circle, your tribe, the communities that you belong to. The retrograde asked you, are these actually your people? Are you performing a version of yourself to belong? What dreams are you pursuing because they're expected rather than because they're true? The direct motion of Saturn asks you to build authentic community, to commit to friendships that can handle your depth. Stop trying to fit in. Find where you actually belong, Taurus. The evolutionary work for you is this. Your worth isn't determined by social acceptance. Real friends don't require you to shrink. For Gemini, Saturn is in your 10th house of career, public roles, authority, legacy, reputation. You've been building professional maturity, learning to be taken seriously, confronting what it means to be visible. The retrograde period asked you, are you avoiding responsibility in your career? Are you staying small to stay safe? What authority are you refusing to claim? The direct motion of Saturn asks you to step up, take the role, accept the visibility, stop waiting for permission to be the expert that you already are. The evolutionary work for you is this. Your ideas need structure to reach people, Gemini. Wisdom without responsibility is just entertainment. For Cancer, Saturn is showing up in your 9th house of belief systems, higher education, travel, philosophy, and meaning making. You've been reconstructing your worldview, questioning inherited beliefs, learning to commit to a path. The retrograde asked you, what beliefs were you holding on to because they're uncomfortable rather than because they're true? What spiritual bypassing are you using to avoid practical action? Direct motion of Saturn asks this. Commit to a practice, not just ideas. Embodied action, not just philosophy, lived ethics. The evolutionary work for you is this. Faith without works is dead. Your beliefs must translate into how you actually live. For Leo, Saturn is in your 8th house of shared resources, intimacy, death, and rebirth, other people's money, psychological depth. You've been learning about power dynamics, financial interdependence, the work of real intimacy. The retrograde asked you, where are you still trying to control outcomes? What vulnerability are you avoiding? Where is your generosity actually manipulation? Saturn direct says, true intimacy requires surrender and boundaries. You can't merge with someone and maintain your sovereignty unless you've done the work of knowing who you are first. The evolutionary work for you, Leo, is this. Your power doesn't come from control. It comes from being fully yourself without apology. For Virgo, Saturn is in your 7th house of partnerships, marriage, contracts, the mirror of relationship. You've been confronting codependency, learning to be in relationship without losing yourself. The retrograde period asked, are you over-functioning in relationships? Are you doing all the emotional labor? What boundaries have you failed to set because you're afraid of conflict or abandonment? Saturn's direct motion demands reciprocity. Real partnership requires 2 adults, not 1 adult and 1 child. Stop fixing. Stop fixing people who aren't asking to be fixed. The evolutionary work for you is this. Being of service doesn't mean being a doormat. Healthy relationships require mutual effort. For Libra, Saturn is in your 6th house of daily work, health routines, service, and the body. You've been building sustainable practices, learning that transformation happens through consistent small actions, not dramatic gestures. The retrograde period asked, what routines are you avoiding? What health issues are you neglecting? Where is your service to others actually avoidance of your own life? The direct motion of Saturn says, commit to the boring, necessary work. Your spiritual evolution happens in how you treat your body. Structure your day and show up consistently. The evolutionary work for you is this: discipline is love. Taking care of yourself is the foundation for taking care of anyone else. For Scorpio, Saturn is in your 5th house of creativity, romance, children, joy, and self-expression. You've been learning that real creativity requires discipline, that joy is actually a practice, that love needs structure. The retrograde period asked, are you avoiding pleasure because you think it's not spiritual? What creative projects have you abandoned because they got difficult? Where are you confusing intensity with intimacy? Saturn's direct motion says, create consistently, not just when inspired, when committed. Romance is work. Joy requires practice. Play is serious business. The evolutionary work for you is this: your depth doesn't need to be heavy. Lightness is also profound. For Sagittarius, Saturn is in your 4th house of home, family, roots, emotional foundation, and private life. You've been building emotional maturity, confronting family patterns, learning what home actually means. The retrograde period asked, what family patterns are you still repeating? What emotional work are you avoiding by staying busy with expansion, travel, and teaching? Saturn's direct motion says, tend to your roots. You can't grow upward without growing downward. Home isn't a place. It's the work of becoming your own secure base. The evolutionary work for you, Sagittarius, your wisdom needs a foundation. Your philosophy needs to be lived at home with the people who know you best. For Capricorn, Saturn, your ruling planet, is in your 3rd house of communications, learning, siblings, the local environment, the way you think. You've been learning to think differently, to speak more carefully, to listen more deeply. The retrograde period asked, what stories are you telling yourself that no longer serve you? How is your thinking creating your reality? Where are you using intellect to avoid feeling? Saturn's direct motion says, your words create worlds. Your thoughts create your life. Commit to conscious communication with yourself and with others. The evolutionary work for you, Capricorn, wisdom isn't just what you know, it's how you apply knowledge in your daily life. For Aquarius, Saturn, your traditional ruling planet, is in your 2nd house of money, values, self-worth, resources, what you value. You've been rebuilding your relationship with material reality, learning what you actually value versus what you think you should value. The retrograde period asked you this: are your values aligned with your spending? Is your self-worth dependent on external validation? What resources are you refusing to claim because you're spiritually bypassing material reality? Saturn's direct motion says, claim your worth, Aquarius. Charge what you're worth, Aquarius. Invest in what you value. Money is energy. Use it consciously. Your evolutionary work is this: being spiritual doesn't mean being broke. You can serve humanity and pay your bills. For Pisces, Saturn is in your 1st house of identity, body, self-presentation, how you meet this world. This has been the most personal, most demanding, most transformative Saturn transit you'll ever experience. The retrograde period asked, who are you when you stop performing spirituality? What boundaries do you need that you've been avoiding? Where have you confused compassion with self-abandonment? Saturn's direct motion says, you're almost done. February 13th, Saturn leaves. But these final 11 weeks are crucial. Claim your boundaries, own your authority, stop apologizing for taking up space. The evolutionary work for you, Pisces, you're allowed to have edges. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to exist as a separate self, even while you understand oneness. All right, friends, let's talk about some practical guidance for working with Saturn direct. I've got some do's and don'ts. Let's start with the do's. First, do complete unfinished business. What did you start and abandon? Finish it or consciously choose to let it go. Don't let things linger. Do build sustainable structures, not grand plans, daily practices, not dramatic changes, consistent small steps. Do face reality without resentment. Saturn doesn't care about your feelings about reality. Reality is reality. Your work is to accept it and to work with it consciously. Do set boundaries you'll actually maintain. Stop setting boundaries you immediately violate. Better to have fewer, firmer boundaries than many that you can't enforce. Honor commitments or renegotiate them consciously. If you're not going to follow through, say so. Don't let people count on you if you're not going to show up. Invest in the long game. Saturn rewards patience, consistency, mastery earned over time. Quick fixes fail. Deep work is what lasts. Be accountable for your spiritual practice. What are you actually practicing? Not what you think you should practice. Track it. Measure it. Be honest about your gaps. Support your vision with strategy. Dreams are beautiful. Plans are necessary. Execution is everything. And here are some don'ts. Don't spiritual bypass, friends. Stop using trust the universe as an excuse to avoid doing your work. Don't confuse compassion with codependency. Boundaries aren't unspiritual. They're essential. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Saturn says, work with what you have. Build in the mess. Create despite the obstacles. Don't avoid difficult emotions. Feel them, all of them. Your spiritual maturity is measured by your capacity to feel without being destroyed. Don't overgive to prove your worth. You don't earn love through exhaustion. Stop that. Don't use spirituality to avoid material reality. You have a body. You need money. You live in form. Honor those truths. Don't mistake discipline for punishment. Discipline is freedom. It's necessary. Structure is liberation. Limits allow for your expansion. All right, friends. Saturn stations direct at 25 degrees Pisces on November 27th and 28th. Jupiter stands at 25 degrees Cancer, offering faith, support, emotional abundance, and Neptune lingers in the final degrees of Pisces, dissolving what's ready to end. For 2.5 years, Saturn in Pisces has been teaching you how to be spiritually mature. Not enlightened, mature. Not transcendent, responsible. Not saved, sovereign. You've learned that faith without works is absolute fantasy, that compassion without boundaries is codependency, that surrender requires taking full responsibility, that dreams need structure to become real, that the mystical must be grounded in the material, that your spiritual evolution happens through embodied action. The retrograde asked you to review. Where did you skip steps along the way? What maturity are you still avoiding? What illusions are you still clinging to? Now Saturn goes direct. The work you've done internally becomes external. The structures you've been building in private are ready to be tested in reality. The commitments you've been preparing for are ready to be lived now. Between now and February 13th, Saturn's final 11 weeks in Pisces, you have one task. Complete the cycle. Finish what you started. Release what's done. Integrate what you've learned. Build the final structures. Make the final commitments. Tie up the loose ends. Don't take unfinished business into the next cycle, friends. On February 13th, Saturn enters Aries and begins a new 29-year cycle through the zodiac. On February 20th, Saturn and Neptune meet at 0 degrees Aries, structure and dissolution, form and formlessness, beginning a new dance. But you can only enter that new cycle with integrity if you complete this one. So for the next 11 weeks, here's your work. Ask yourself, what dream am I finally ready to build? Not fantasize about, build. Not hope for, but actually create. And not wait for permission to pursue, but to claim. Ask yourself, what spiritual maturity have I earned? Where have I actually done the work, not just talked about it? Where have I integrated my shadow, set real boundaries, and taken full responsibility? Ask yourself this, what am I finally ready to commit to, knowing that commitment means letting go of everything else? Saturn in Pisces taught you that true spirituality isn't about transcending your humanity, It's about being fully human with consciousness, compassion, and responsibility. It's about building containers strong enough to hold infinite love. It's about creating structures flexible enough to honor mystery. It's about being disciplined enough to sustain what grace initiates. Remember, friends, remember Saturn arriving in Latium, dethroned, defeated, fugitive. But he brought wisdom. He brought structure. He brought the capacity to build civilization from chaos. And he created the Golden Age, not through divine power, but through teaching others how to plant seeds, tend crops, create laws, and build society. Your Golden Age doesn't come from transcending your limitations. It comes from working with them, from building within them, from accepting reality and creating beauty anyway. The dream becomes real when you do the work. Saturn is direct. The work begins now. So go build. Okay, friends. Make sure you're subscribed to the Celestial Lab, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Check out the links in the description for how to work with me if you want to have a reading with me of your birth chart or a composite reading with a partner, personal or business. And I'll look forward to hearing from you. So until next time, friends, stay open, stay grounded, and keep evolving consciously. Bye for now.